to deceive us. But they are representations that miss out a lot of the really important biology of plants. Because it turns out that if you were to actually slice through a leaf and draw all the different things that were inside it, you wouldn't just have plant cells. You would have lots of little fungi and bacteria and little animals like mites and nematodes living in and on and around this. So here, this is a diagram that's taken away most of the biological network that is the trees, plants, that comprises the plant's leaf. So let me show you that in a sort of practical way here. If you take an ordinary leaf from a maple tree, this is from my backyard in Tennessee, just an ordinary suburban sugar maple. What I did was dip that sugar maple leaf in some bleach and a little alcohol to sterilize the outside of the leaf. So if my hand was the leaf, I sterilized, really washed it off to clean all the bacteria and fungal spores off of it. And then, and I'm not going to do this to my hand, because the next thing is you slice up that leaf into lots of little pieces, and you can see that here. And I put them on a petri dish. So we've got a sterilized leaf, its head is leaf, surface is sterilized, put on a petri dish, and then we're going to put that in an incubator where it's nice and warm and toasty. And this petri dish, the leaves, the fragments of leaf, are on a medium that allows fungi to grow. So there's fungus food in that. So if there are any fungi here, they're going to come out and grow. Now, they're not going to produce mushrooms and things like that, because we're just going to do this for 2 or 3 days just to see what's there. And remember, we clean the top and the bottom of this leaf with bleach. This is one example of what happens. You have this incredible growth of fungi, and where were they? They were inside the leaf. So it turns out that sugar maple leaf had dozens of species of fungi living inside the leaf. If we were to do the same experiments with bacteria, we'd find there are hundreds of species of bacteria inside the leaf. And these aren't just like hitchhikers or little hangers-on of no consequence. It turns out that if you take them away, the leaf can't protect itself properly from pathogens. The leaf can't protect itself from drought. And so the fungi and the bacteria, the other species that live inside the sugar maple leaf, help the leaf do its job. And we found the same is true of roots now. And you may well have heard this story. It's pretty well known now that when you look at a plant root, for most plants, that root is connected intimately with fungi that feed the plant, that give it minerals and water. And then the plant reciprocates by giving some sugars and other organic molecules back to the fungus. The plant root is also in conversation with lots of bacteria around it. You can think of the end of a root as having a halo around it, this glowing area of intense life. There are 100, maybe 1,000 times more bacteria, and there's more activity in the soil right around the root, because the root is in relationship with the other creatures around it. So when we give a name to a plant, like that's a sugar maple, that name is a shorthand. It's useful, but in a way, it's not true, because when we look at the tree, there are actually hundreds of species there. And the tree wouldn't be able to live unless it had those fungi and bacteria on and in its body, in its leaves and on its roots. Now, the same is true also of the human body. The bacteria in our guts and the bacteria in our skin are essential to healthy functioning. If you take them away, we become very vulnerable to sickness and infection. So if you completely sterilize all of the skin on your body, what happens is the pathogenic bacteria in the environment around you say, woohoo, here's it, like it's an open field. We can land on this and grow like crazy and take over. Whereas a nice, healthy, like all of us have this, even when after we washed our hands and so on, we still have bacteria left on us. And that's a good thing. It helps keep healthy skin. The same is true in the gut. Without the bacteria in our gut, we're really very sick. We can't digest properly. And it turns out, even in that place where we imagine ourselves to be most alone in our thoughts and our consciousness, that the texture of human consciousness, whether we feel happy or sad, is partly a product of human nerve cells, but it's also what's happening with the bacteria in our guts. The bacteria in our gut communicate through a particular nerve up into the human brain. So my contention, and in the book that I'll describe a few examples from here briefly, is that life shouldn't be thought of as made of individuals. Life is, in fact, all about community and interconnection and relationship. The human body is made of multiple different species in relation to one another. The human mind is made from conversation and connection with others. A human being raised alone, unfortunately, there are very, very few examples of this, without any contact with other human beings, can't develop fully psychologically. So our minds are a product of a community as well. And a tree, and you can see the subtitle of this book, Nature's Great Connectors, the trees are the champion networks, because trees have got huge bodies, right? So lots of surface area to connect with other species. They're very long-lived, so they have a very, a lot of opportunity to make connections with others. And unlike animals, when a tree germinates, it's stuck where it is. It's got to make it work in the exact location where it germinated. Now, there are some trees like clonal plant trees that, like sassafras and so on, that will grow outwards and can move around a little bit in the environment. But they can't do what a bird does, is like migrate to a different country or different state when conditions aren't right. So a tree has to make it work, which is a great incentive to cooperate and interact with other species. So one of the themes of this book is that life is made of networked connection. Life is made of relationship. The old view that life was just all about individual selves interacting with one another is useful, but it's limited. And like those biology textbook diagrams I showed you, it leaves out a lot of the story of what makes life what it is. So I explored those ideas, as I said, through particular trees in different parts of the world. Here's the first one. This is Jerusalem. So this is the Damascus Gate, which is just outside one of the gates that leads into the old city of Jerusalem, which is a site, of course, of a sacred site for in Judaism and Christianity and in Islam. Lots of people coming on pilgrimage through these gates. This is only one of several gates into the old city. In the foreground, what do we see? An olive tree. Those branches sticking down are a fairly large olive tree growing close to the gates of the old city. And this is early in the summer, so you can see there are some tiny little olive fruits there. So the olive and the city of Jerusalem, and indeed all of the cultures of the Mediterranean, have a very tight relationship. And the lives of trees and the lives of people are deeply, deeply interconnected. And that, in fact, translates on into our present time, our present moment, as we'll discuss. So here's another view looking across from the Mount of Olives, looking across to the old city of Jerusalem, again through an olive tree, and there are olive groves in the foreground there. Now, if you go underneath the gate to the old city of Jerusalem, what do you find? You find a whole other city, because Jerusalem is a city built on a city built on another. It's history going back thousands of years. In particular, the Romans left extensive remains of roads and buildings and so forth. And some of the buildings underneath the existing buildings in the old city of Jerusalem, which can be 3, 4, 5 stories tall, in their basements often are other buildings that are 3 stories tall, and you go down to the very bottom and there are roads where you can see the Roman soldiers had made graffiti and so on. So literally the city now that we see is built on top of the old Roman city, which itself was built on even older remains from early times from early Israel, and then even further back into prehistoric times as well. In the region is one of the places where people were active tens of thousands of years ago. So here's a photograph from underneath, literally underneath the Damascus Gate, underneath the photograph that I showed you before. And this is part of the old Roman city, and part of it is this. This is an olive press. People would take the olive fruit and then use this big stone roller to go around and around and squish the olives, crush them so that the oil came out. And these olive presses are all over in the Middle East, really, really important. And in fact, were symbols of wealth, just like you might want to have some fancy cars parked out beside the front of your house to show how wealthy you are. Back in those days, if you had a lot of olive presses, that showed that you'd really made it, that you were wealthy. And archaeologists have actually found there were more olive presses than could possibly have been used by the olives they had, because they were a status symbol as well, because the olive and olive oil was so important. Okay, so to put some more historical context here, here's a map just to show you where we are. On the left side of the screen is the Mediterranean Sea, Tel Aviv. And then Jerusalem sits here on this high ridge in the middle. And I draw, so down through here, there's sort of a mountain ridge and the winds come across from, I'm trying to get my little arrow going here. Winds come across from the west to the east. Here we go. So the prevailing winds blow like this. You can imagine in the springtime, when there's a lot of wind coming across, what's going to happen to all the pollen from the olive trees. The pollen from the olive trees in the mountains around Jerusalem gets picked up by the wind and gets dumped further to the east into the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is famous because it is such, so here's the Dead Sea right here. It forms a border between the West Bank and Jordan, which is over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And the Dead Sea has been there for tens of thousands of years, receiving pollen from the Jerusalem hills. And so what the Dead Sea is a place where we have a record decade by decade as the mud and the pollen accumulate in the base of the sea, where you can see what kind of plants were growing in and around Jerusalem. So it's this amazing history of the botany of this region, of the ecology of this region, and it turns out of human civilization in the region, right here in the waters of the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea, as you may know, is gradually drying out because not enough water is coming into it, too much evaporation and way too much water being drawn out for irrigation, not from the Dead Sea itself because it's very salty, but from the waters that used to flow into it. So when you go there, you see you can see how the sea has receded over time. In the foreground, there are some little warning signs saying, don't come over here, because there are mines left over from the war with Jordan in the 1960s. Those mines are still there. In these layers of mud is a record of ecology. The deepest ones are from the earliest years, some as early as 10, 20,000 years ago. And the mud higher up on the bottom of the Dead Sea is from more recent times. So you can dig into that mud and then put it under a microscope, and this is what you see, pollen grains. This is one pollen grain from olives. And so you can track, if you're patient enough, layer by layer, how much olive was growing in the mountains around Jerusalem. And here we're getting to the punchline. The circled red here shows Olea, which is the olive tree. And the height of these black lines, this graph shows how much olive pollen was present from 10,000 years ago at the bottom of the graph all the way up to the present time. And you can see that after the olive tree was domesticated, about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, for a lot of pollen coming from olive trees. And this was a time when human civilizations were flourishing in the region. So the key here is when olives and people became linked, when people domesticated the olive, cleared out competition, stopped forest fires, built irrigation ditches, amazing irrigation systems all over the Middle East, bringing water to olive trees. The olives benefited hugely, and so did humans. And then, in the times like where this red arrow is pointing at the late Bronze Age, where the bond between people and olives was broken, everything fell apart. Human civilization collapsed. And what caused that? Extended drought that killed the olive trees, killed all the other crops as well. And so people could no longer find sustenance from the land, and all the great Bronze Age civilizations collapsed and disappeared. And the last written records are showing letters on clay tablets asking for food shipments from Egypt and other things. And then there's no more record because the civilization collapsed. So people and olive trees in the Middle East have had their histories interlinked for thousands and thousands of years, which is why they're still so important today. You can see that during the Roman times and the early Islamic period, there's also a lot of pollen from olives, because the Romans in particular built a lot of irrigation and supported olive agriculture. Now, why is olive so important compared to like any other plant? Well, olive oil has more calories per volume than almost any other crop. It's got as many calories in the same volume as red meat. And it's a lot easier to get a high volume of olive oil than, of course, it is to grow other crops, whether they're plant or animal crops, in a very arid environment. The olive tree is adapted to living in pretty hostile conditions, and it provides food and sustenance. So the olive trees that we see now around the Mediterranean are mostly domesticated. Even the wild trees growing out in the wilder parts of the hills have got genes in them from domesticated olives. And all the human civilizations in the region, whether it's Jerusalem or Athens or Greece or Knossos or Carthage, were built partly through symbiosis between people and olive trees. And we see this in the symbols that people used to represent life and goodness. So in Judaism, of course, celebrate the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, which commemorates many things, but the central symbol there is the olive oil lamp that should have gone out because there wasn't enough olive oil, but kept on burning for days and days. This amazing, beautiful story of unending plenitude that is about religious matters, but it's also about ecological matters, because they didn't use some other oil, they used olive oil for the reason that this was the source of life at that time in this region. In Islam, Allah is compared to the light that comes from an olive oil lamp, neither from the east or the west, this incredibly pure light. In Christianity, what does Christ mean? Christ means the anointed one, Christos from the Greek. And anointed with what? Anointed with olive oil. So even in the name Christ, we have a memory of olive oil retained. In more secular realms, we also remember the olive tree and the way that it sustained the civilizations around the Mediterranean. If you pull out a dollar bill, you'll find olives on both sides of that bill. The numeral 1 is wrapped around with olive branches, and then on the other side, the eagle in its talons is holding, one of the things it's holding are olive branches. And that's also true of some British currency and other currencies as well. So even though, you know, olives are not native to North America, they're certainly not native to Britain, and to many of the places where Islam and Judaism and Christianity now has taken root as religions, olives are still alive, a memory of this interconnection between people and trees. So remember, the theme here is that none of us live alone. there's no such thing as pure individuality. And that is true at the level of cultures and civilizations as well. The civilizations of the Mediterranean that many of us gained many of our religious and wisdom traditions from are built in deep relationship with a particular tree, the olive tree. Same is true in other parts of the world. I'll give you one more shorter example here. This is from Scotland, where some of my family live. This is they're building a huge bridge across the Forth. And as they dug up down into the soil to build this really impressive bridge, they dug up a Mesolithic village. And this is the remains of the earliest known human settlement in this region after the Ice Age. So Scotland was covered in glaciers during the Ice Age. As the ice retreated, people moved up to colonize the most northern parts of Europe, as they did in France, Germany, Scandinavia, and so forth, in the Mesolithic. And they left remains and that were dug up of a small village from about 10,000 years ago. And here's mostly what you find in that village is charcoal. It's a burned remains of plants that look like this. It's almost all the shells of hazelnuts or little pieces of wood, of hazel wood. So this was a culture, this was a people whose most of their calories came from tree nuts, from eating hazelnuts. And this was true for hundreds of years across all of Northern Europe. Is the first people who came up to Northern Europe after the Ice Age were sustained by trees. And here's a picture of some hazelnuts now. You can see these burned ones, even though they're nearly 10,000 years old. They look almost like someone just threw the charred remains of the nut shell into the campfire just yesterday, because being burned and buried like this really preserves plant material very well. So these hazelnuts could colonize this very cold, wet climate after the Ice Age, not because they were going it alone, but because they were working in relationship with others. So the hazelnut tree has a special relationship with fungi below ground. The hazelnut's roots, each root is wrapped in a fungus, an ectomycorrhizal fungus, that protects it from acidity and protects it from pathogens and from the cold, damp, waterlogged soil. So without that fungus below ground, the hazelnut couldn't survive. Well, and how did the hazelnut get there, though? Well, it got there because birds like jays brought the seeds and planted them. But also, quite possibly, it came because people brought it. Hazelnuts, compared to all other trees, colonized Northern Europe very, very rapidly. And there's a hypothesis that people made that happen. And so here again, you have this reciprocity. The lives of people were made possible by trees, by hazelnut trees. But the lives of the trees were made possible by the people, by the action of the people planting and caring for the trees. And also the trees had a below ground partner, a fungus that allowed it to colonize. So all across Northern Europe, people's relationship with trees was really, really important. The same is true in North America, particularly in the East, and the eastern deciduous forests, where until the fungus blight took out the American chestnut, the chestnut, along with hickory nuts and some acorns, were a calorific foundation for many of the indigenous peoples of Eastern North America. In the tropics, other examples of fruiting trees and nut trees and oil trees supporting people through horticulture. And so this theme of people being in close relationship with trees, it applies all around the world. I've just shared a couple of particular examples with you. And it's true now. I mean, you pick up pretty much any processed food these days in North America, and it's got palm oil in it. That palm oil comes from palm trees that are grown in plantations in the tropics. And palm oil is the foundation of a lot of the food industry now. Some of that palm oil is grown responsibly. Some of it, unfortunately, is not. It's palm oil plantations that are a leading cause of the massive levels of deforestation that are underway in some parts of the world, particularly in Southeast Asia and some parts of Africa and South America. So our relationship with trees in terms of eating is a little more hidden now, but it is still present. So trees are the great connectors. They live in relationship with fungi, with bacteria, and also with people. That's true in the middle of the city as well. It's not just true of the ancient peoples living in Northern Europe or in Israel and in Jerusalem. This is one of the trees that I studied. It's in Manhattan. This is a Callery pear, a Bradford pear that was planted as an ornamental tree on the side of a very busy sidewalk. For those of you who know New York, it's on Broadway at 86 in the Upper West Side. And I returned again and again to this tree to see what it would teach me about how people and trees are interconnected. And even though this is a very busy place, seemingly not much interaction between people and trees, I learned that, in fact, trees and people are deeply connected in the heart of the city. Here's one example. Here's a swipe of a sponge across a windowsill from an apartment just a few blocks north of this tree. What is all that dark stuff? Well, it's soot from diesel engines, from people's diesel trucks and the buses that ran outside, and also the oil that apartment buildings burn for heating in the winter. Produces a lot of particulate pollution that settles all over windowsills, and it settles in our lungs as well, and is a major cause of lung disease and asthma attacks and so on. This is well known. Particulate pollution, whatever the source, is not good for the human respiratory system. In fact, it's not just the respiratory system. Those little particles get into the lungs, and then some of them, the little ones, get into the blood and inflame the heart and the other tissues and organs of the body. So it's not just our lungs that are damaged by this, it's the rest of the body when we inhale it. Now, this is my hand after I've rested it on the tree during a rain shower. So we're back at the tree. It's been raining, and I put my hand on the tree and pulled it away. And what happened? Wow, my hand is covered in soot. What happened? Well, that great big tree, every single surface on the leaves, on the twigs, every little contour on the bark, is a soot catcher. The soot in the air lands on the tree and gets held there. And then when it rains, it gets washed to the ground, to the sewage system. So the trees are quite literally cleaning the air. It's like having HEPA air filters running all the time in the city, except you don't have to plug them in. You just have to plant them and take care of it. And so every breath of air that we take into our lungs in the city connects us in a very deep and intimate way to trees. In New York, they've gotten ahead of this and realized, well, we could help improve public health through this. And they've done some maps where they plot out which parts of the city have got the worst cases of lung disease, where people have the least healthy lungs. And then they plotted which parts of the city don't have many trees. And where those two things overlap, where people have poor lung health and where there aren't too many trees, they've gone in and planted whole city blocks with trees to increase the green in those neighborhoods to help people's lung health in the long term. Now, trees alone aren't going to solve this problem. Of course, the air we breathe now in most American cities is actually way cleaner than it was in the 1970s, 1980s, mostly through changes in automobile and truck technology and in home heating technologies that mean we're just burning fuel more efficiently, we're wasting less money, and we're causing less harm to ourselves as we do that. And so changes in whether it's through technological improvements or regulation or some combination of the above of engine technology is also part of what needs to happen to clean the air. But trees are a really big part of this. And even in places like New York, which you think of as a very kind of busy urban city, 20% of New York City is actually tree canopy cover because there are enough trees along the streets and in parks and so on to actually do a pretty significant job of cleaning the air. Now, that's not all a tree is doing for people. It's also casting shade. All of us in the South know this very well, that having some trees around can really reduce the heat island effect in neighborhoods. This tree in New York, I go out in the afternoon in the summer and put your hand on the sidewalk and it's like really cool under the tree. But on the sidewalk away from the tree where the sun has been beating on it, it's like 15 degrees hotter there. You come back at 2 a.m., put a thermometer or your hand down on the sidewalk, it's still cooler under the tree, even though it's the middle of the night. And you put the thermometer down on the sidewalk in a place where the sun has been beating on it with no shade, it's still 10 degrees warmer. Why is that? It's because the sun's heat got sucked up by that sidewalk and then comes back out at night. So it's like someone left a whole city full of electric radiators running all night, which is not what you want, right? Because it's like 95 degrees, it's humid, and people are trying to stay cool in their apartments. And so trees are cooling the city down. Huge benefit, tens of millions of dollars in saved air conditioning costs because of street trees in New York. The same is true in other places. I'm actually talking to you right now from Atlanta, where 40% of Atlanta is tree canopy cover, and trees make a huge difference in the heat in the middle of summer here. So heat is important. Trees also change the stormwater flow. They suck up some of the rainfall and slow the surges of stormwater going into drains, and that creates less flooding and pollution in creeks and rivers. The trees also open human senses and give us things, aesthetic wonders. They're little portals of green in the middle of the city where you can smell and hear and see a little glimpse of nature, and lifts the spirits, carries us out of that time and place. Trees also form barriers on the street. In New York City, this photo was taken not during the rush hour, during a quieter time, but usually if you're walking and you stop, you're going to get mowed over by other pedestrians. Very active. Whereas if you walk over to the side and stand under the tree, you've got a little barrier there, and you can take a call on the phone or eat your lunch or whatever it is you need to do. So next time you're in the city and looking at how people interact with one another on a street with trees, compare that to how people with one another on the sidewalk that doesn't have any trees. People are more friendly. They go a little slower. They take the time to say hello. The trees are entering human social networks and actually drawing us together into community in really special ways. We, of course, reciprocate in New York City. When you plant a tree and put a little tag on it, inviting people to learn more about the tree, and you involve people in the city in planting the tree, that tree's probability of survival is much higher. It's like 90 to 100% over 10 years compared to a tree that you just plant and leave there. So by giving trees our attention, by raising awareness within the human community, we actually give life back to the tree, because people in the neighborhood will be more likely to care for that tree and less likely to damage it. So in the city too, just as was true in Jerusalem with the olives, in cities in America, we now have this reciprocal relationship, a symbiosis where we benefit from trees and the trees benefit from us, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, let me close here with one other example. This is from the forest in Tennessee. It turns out trees are these great networkers even after they die. This is a great big green ash tree that fell down, and I came on this tree right after it fell in a windstorm. It's now, I've been following it for many years now. It's now, I was there the other week, and what we're seeing now has partly decomposed and sunk down into the forest. And the plants around it have grown up. You can barely even see the log anymore. And this log, turns out, every time I go and study it, there's some new creature making use of it. So dead trees are this incredible life-giving hub in the forest. Here are a few examples. Within an hour of that tree falling down, there were some specialized beetles, native bark beetles, that smelled the busted up wood, flew in to lay their eggs on this tree. And this is a few months later when they're young, are poking the sawdust back out of the tree. So the tree within a few hours becomes a nursery for all these tiny little beetles beetle larvae. The adults are actually quite big, like this big, but the larvae are much smaller, at least at first. And that, of course, is then food for all kinds of other creatures. Other insects come and eat them, and then woodpeckers come and drill through the tree and look for them and eat them. As the tree fell, it tore a hole in the canopy, in the forest canopy, that let in a lot of light. That light came in, and the plants down below went crazy with growth. Here are some of the wildflowers that grew. Normally, these wildflowers would grow up to your ankle. Underneath this hole in the tree canopy, they were up to like my knees or higher. So on the left, you got trilliums. You got some phlox in the middle there, and chickweed, the white one right in the very center. Top right is a Dutchman's breeches, and then the bottom right is the spring beauties. All of these wildflowers went crazy because this tree had created an opportunity as it fell. Animals use this. This is a timber rattlesnake. When the rattlesnakes eat a chipmunk, they need to hang out somewhere to digest it. And it turns out that the snakes, but also deer and other animals, would come in to use the warmth in this little patch of sunlight to toast and hang out and warm up. Butterflies did the same thing. They'd fly in from the woods, sit on a low branch or a low leaf in this forest opening, warm up for a few minutes, and then fly on. So the hole in the tree canopy provided a lot of energy. As the trunk fell, it actually split. And this is looking through the trunk. So I put my camera so it's poking through the broken open tree trunk. And inside that tree trunk is a pool of water that formed. And inside that pool of water were tadpoles and little insects and insect larvae. This place, there are no other standing water bodies in this forest. This became a little lake inside the tree, or a pond or a swamp inside the tree that provided habitat for other species. And then some of the bigger creatures, this is from a game camera that I set out, bobcats and raccoons and coyotes and so on, using the dead log as a runway to wander back and forth, but also as a signpost. They leave little deposits there. This is a fox poop, some scat of a fox that is full of the seeds of American wild grape. So the mammals are actually bringing new plants into this region, and these grape seeds have now germinated, and there are wild grapes growing all over the place there. So the tree in its death became a hub for new life. So trees are not just champion connectors when they're alive, but they also have a long afterlife where they're drawing creatures back together again in community. And so I'll conclude there with this thought, and that is to invite you to find a tree in your own neighborhood, close to where you live, and go back again and again over the next few weeks to that tree, just a few minutes each time, to open your ears and your eyes to the tree. Use your hands to discover something more about the texture of the bark. Figure out which insects and birds like to hang out in the tree. Ask, where did this tree come from? Is this indigenous to this place, or was it imported from some interesting other locale, like from East Asia or from the Caribbean? And befriend the tree. So my concluding invitation is to open your senses to these other beings and see where that friendship, where that curiosity will take you, without any particular goal in mind other than coming to know that tree just a little bit better, coming to know the way that it supports the network of life around it. And then asking, what do we need to do to help this tree along? What might it like from us to continue its work as a life-giving hub within life's amazing, complicated, beautiful networks? So I will conclude there, and would be delighted to take any questions or hear your thoughts.
Let's see here. We pull up the chat. got some compliments here.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic presentation. I don't know, folks, you guys got any questions? Like, you can unmute, bring your video up. Now is the time.
You know, I'd love to hear what trees are particularly special in your opinion. Question here: any favorite books about trees? There's one called Sprout Lands. I'll put the and William Bryant Logan, that he's someone who's worked with trees as a horticulturalist and as an ecologist. So he really understands them from a very practical level, but also understands the personality and character of trees and so on in some very deep ways. So that's one that I found is particularly interesting and eye-opening.
Let's see. Got one here. Your focus of interconnectedness of people and trees reminds me of Donald Colross Petty's books. Yeah, no, those are really poetic books, classics in sort of American nature writing, and he's so amazing. I was actually rereading some of those earlier this year during the winter, and the way that he evoked the personality and the feel of each place was really stunning. And he went all over North America to study trees. And those, there are some things in the books that seem to our minds a little, not with the times now. But some stuff that's actually into a modern era is pretty racist. Just a few little places in the books, but mostly the books are full of just the poetry of how people have interacted with of trees. Really admirable work in regard of how he brought the life of each tree onto the page. Question here about the Overstory. Yeah, Richard Powell's book, The Overstory, is a marvelous book of fiction. It's a novel that really takes seriously the ways in which trees are interconnected with one another and with people. So a marvelous work of imagination. Been widely recognized. It won the Pulitzer. Yeah, that's another book that I would definitely recommend. So I got a question. What do you have in works right now, like for your next project? So right now I'm actually finishing up on 2 different books. One of them will be out next year. It's a book I've been working on for many years now, and I'm glad to see that it's finally about the diversity of sound in the world. So which includes human music. It includes the voices of animals and of mammals and birds and insects, looking at how did all that great exuberant diversity of sound come to be? Like, what are some of the creative forces in ecology and evolution that made the soundscapes that we know in the world now? And then asks, what can we do to kind of help maintain the diversity and the beauty and the creativity of sounds in the world? So if you're into birds and insects and stories of the sensory richness of the world, I think it will be an interesting book. It also has some conservation themes in it about how we can make sure we're being good stewards of the diversity of life. One section deals specifically with human music and how human music is always in relation to the lives of other species. When you hear a guitar or a violin, you're hearing wood. You're hearing the voice of a particular forest. So that's a sort of a theme that I want to pull out in that book too. Then I have another book that will only be out in the UK, although I imagine some booksellers here in the US may also carry it. And it's about the aromas of trees. 13 different trees and what the aroma of the tree can tell us about our relationship with it. I mean, say, for example, Christmas trees. Bringing spruce trees in or into the house, even for those of us who don't live where any spruce trees live,
is for a lot of people is this tradition, and so I get into what that aroma means. Why do the trees smell that way, and how do humans connect? Trees that produce interesting aromas like whiskey, right? So bourbon is matured in oak barrels, and Scotch whiskey then reuses those barrels. So, a sip of bourbon is connecting with the forests of Tennessee and Kentucky. So looking at all those aromas and tracing their stories back. So, yeah, I see a comment here about Jane Goodall. I mean, all of Jane Goodall's books are amazing. Seeds of Hope has a great chapter on trees and forest. And yeah, I'm such an admirer of her work as a conservationist and a scientist, but also as a writer. Some of her, like the earliest book, In the Shadow of Man, which is about how she came to Gombe and studied the chimpanzees. That's just a real classic. It's not so much about trees, but it really is a extraordinary book worth reading.
So have you gone on to do, I know like some of the research you were involved with up there kind of looked at like exurban type issues with exurban biology. Have you looked at all like ecosystem services at all, like, or anything, or is that not as important given that like you're kind of surrounded up there? Just kind of curious if you guys have started looking at any of that up at Swanee.
Yeah, I don't. So yes, I and some of my students have done work over the years looking at how low density housing development affects things like snails and birds and ecology. I haven't done any direct work on ecosystem services, although there are a number of people looking at water, because of course one of the things that the forests do is they hold and store water and purify water. So if you put a bunch of rows and houses in that, you're disrupting some of that water flow pattern. But there are ways of doing that that'll have a lot less impact. And one of those impacts is through sewage treatment plants. And so Dr. McGrath and some of her colleagues at Swanee have done some amazing work building experimental systems to use constructed wetlands to clean some of the water before it's released and so on. So that, I mean, that's an example of some ecosystem service work that's happening now in Swanee. And more generally, in terms of trees, I do think that the role of trees in cities, it's good to see it being more and more recognized around the country, and particularly people thinking long-term about how we're gonna, as our cities warm up, how are we gonna make sure that it's not just the most wealthy neighborhoods that have the trees in them, it's that how can we make sure that everyone gets the benefit of trees through wise urban planning, through good sort of urban forestry practices and so on, to rectify a little bit of the imbalance that has developed over the decades in how trees are distributed.
Yeah, that definitely that gets into planning and all sorts of other subfields, and yeah, that's where I've been working in that like since moving on from Swanee. So I definitely would one of these days like to catch up and hear more of your perspective. So, but yeah, I guess it's 1 o'clock here. I know you're busy. You're a busy guy. You've got a schedule to keep up here. But thank you very much for
thank you.
For
Thanks
making
for
time
the
for it.
invitation.
I really appreciate it. I mean, I really brought me back to, I guess 15 years ago or so now. So, but it was awesome making time and kind of taking that more philosophical perspective of horticulture and land and I guess the relationship between people and trees.
Yeah, all kinds of, I mean, my focus was on trees, but you could write the same story about corn and wheat and barley and squashes and tomatoes and things. So yeah. It's wonderful to be with you all. I send you all my best wishes. Hope you have the start of summer here is going well for everyone.
I hope your hope you heal up okay too. Like, and
Yeah.
thanks for rescheduling us in here.
Yeah, well, I'm
last
sorry
minute.
I had to bail. Yeah, I had a back issue, and yeah, I got some ways to go on that, but I'm getting help. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Haskell. So yeah, we just go into our
Thank you
meetings
all.
here, but yeah, thank you very much. Take care.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be with everyone.
All right, folks. So with that, we'll go into our our meeting time here. Is Tom here by chance? He sent me the budget, but I don't know if it's really that pressing, if it's something that we can wait, unless he's here right now. I really don't want to go into that topic too much. So, okay, I've got some stuff. Well, but I'll go ahead and call the various committees that first. Jody, Legacy.
Hold on. There I am. I'm unmuted. Yes, the Legacy Award Committee is looking for 2 new members for 2022. We've had 2 great members, Barbara Wilson and Ed Paulson, who have been with the committee for 3 years. They've done an incredible job with it, inspiration for us all. And so we need 2 other people to take their place. John sent out an email. I'm not going to go through the whole email. It's also about the information. But if you are thinking about doing this, please, the deadline for applying as a candidate for the committee is August 30th, 2021 of this year. And that would be so that you could be a committee member beginning January 2022. And again, if you have any questions, just contact me or anyone in the committee. And John has sent that email again. There will also be a Legacy Award recipient for 2021, where we'll be presenting this award at an appropriate time when we can all celebrate together. And that'll be in hopefully the near future or sometime in the future anyway. And if you have any questions, just let us know. We'd be more glad to talk to you about this committee. Okay, thank you, John.
Thanks, Jody.
If anybody has any questions, I know a lot of people have been texting and asking about it, so we can provide all this information. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's see who's on here. If I guess Brenda, if you got anything for Head Start and Advisory Committee.
I'll start with the advisory committee. Our next meeting is July 23rd. It'll be at 10:30 in the morning. If you have anything that you would like us to address, certainly you can send that to John or myself. In terms of Head Start, we are still waiting to hear from administration how and if and when visitors will be allowed in the school sites. And I guess we're hoping that by August we can start doing some reorganization, but I don't know that yet. So watch your email for more information if you're interested in working with the Head Start program.
All right. Well, thank you, Brenda. I guess that is there anybody else here that has anything, groups, committees? I'm going to go, I guess, just be ready. I'm going to go over my couple items here that I've got. I guess most people here, I think, do stuff with, in the plant clinic. We'll be starting to do pH samples for real this time, like beginning hopefully next week. We've got a payment system set up. Janice Overwetter, she's been working very hard at working up our procedures on that. And so that's looking pretty operational. We've got someone else to Gary Smallwood, one of the new folks in the new class, like he's stepped up and he is one of the pH sample folks. And so every Friday we'll just take the collected samples and we'll be running those from here on out. And so there will be an email with like more additional information, like on basically like how we expect it to be, collect samples and everything else within the plant clinic. But only a few master gardeners will be the ones that use the equipment, because it is pretty sensitive, expensive equipment, and we don't want to break too much of it. But yeah, if you've got any interest, make sure to learn. If you want to learn about it, and potentially be an alternate, I would appreciate that very much. And go ahead and just bring it up to me whenever you see me. I guess the other big thing here is better impact. Everybody, it's up and ready to go. I'm still getting a lot of questions. If you have not logged in, or if you've lost your login, you need to go ahead and make sure to let me know so I can reset your password. So go ahead and do that. If let me know if you're having any of these problems still. The other thing I've been hearing about is like issues logging hours. I'm going to send out the tutorial that Clay County did that covered that. They had a series of videos on how to use Better Impact. It's pretty operational at this point. It took me a month or two to really get my bearings in the system, but I feel pretty confident with it now. And if you've got questions, I will try and answer them if you happen to come across me here. But I will also cover it in more detail in August when we have our first in-person lunch and learn. So I'm going to segue into that. August is going to be our first in-person lunch and learn. I'll be the speaker. And well, Jeannie, yeah, you need to I'm getting some messages here. Just go ahead and shoot me an email. That's going to be the best way to communicate with me if you've got questions. But lunch and learn, I'll be the speaker for it. I've got some details to work out here in terms of the logistics and all of that. I got to talk to Carmen but I think that it'll be good. It might be kind of an extended version, like just to give people a chance to get back together and meet up and see each other. Many of you for the first time since COVID all began. So we're okay to go on that front. The very next lunch and learn will be Wendy Wilbur, and that will be another extended one. So just keep that in mind. Wendy Wilbur will be here. We'll do True Colors, which is kind of like a derivative of Myers-Briggs. So that should be good. It should be pretty fun as well. But I guess outside of that, I'm starting to cobble together all of the different committees, the different aspects of what we do here. And I need leaders for all those different committees. And I need to figure out who wants to be involved with the different aspects of being a master gardener in Orange County. It's a big county. There's a lot of things that we have to do. And so I will be sending out an email at some point here to kind of take stock of who wants to be involved with what. And I mean, that will be kind of a guiding point for you in terms of where you can be doing a lot with the program as well. Once we get you involved with those committees, you'll be able to email each other more easily and communicate better via Better Impact through those committees. So just a heads up on that as well. Hours this year. So I talked to Wendy a couple of weeks ago. She said, go ahead and tell people that like hours will start beginning in July. So it will be half a year of hours that we want everyone to be able to do. With that said, I'm not sure we're going to have as many opportunities in terms of events and things like that. So just do your best to try and get your hours this year, but I'm not sure that we'll really, at the end of the day, like if there's going to be anything, a firm requirement. I mean, we just kind of would like to see you try and get to that point. but we will definitely start beginning counting hours for the following year. And I guess, many of you that have been coming in during COVID, you may have reached your hours already. So just a heads up on that front. And if you are a new person, we want you to still get 75 hours, but you basically have an extra half a year to do it beginning in July here. And we want you to get your 75 hours by the end of 2022. So with that, I guess let me see if I've got any questions in the chat here. Does Better Impact show openings for volunteering in the plant clinic? Yes, it should. But we haven't put it in yet for July through December. I've been finalizing everything there. I'm about to finalize it and just have, the people that have been working on Better Impact to just put it in Better Impact all the way through the end of the year. And then you'll be able to volunteer as needed. Okay, Lee, people who've participated in the virtual event in March can now go in and add their hours. Please let everyone know. Yes. So you can go back and volunteer now, like for everything that happened previously. So if you've been keeping track of your hours, like I'd mentioned, you need to go through and try and get those hours in. It's not too complicated. You just need to select that you're engaged in a certain activity within the one of the options on there, scheduling, I believe. And then from there, you click hours on the main menu, and then you can try and you can select a date and then how to log it from, or how you want it to be, what category you want to log it under. And it's pretty straightforward. So I set it up to be as easy as possible in terms of getting these past hours. So any questions? Comments, concerns? Well, I thank you all for being here. I guess if you can go through, give yourselves an hour for continuing education and 15 minutes for the meeting. I think there's an option in there now for the meetings as well, lunch and learn, something along those lines. So that's volunteer service. And I'm looking forward to, seeing all of you. Some of you I've seen already, but seeing the rest of you more and more. And some of you, probably the first time that I've seen you since COVID. So everybody take care. Next Lunch and Learn will be Ryan Klein. He's a former coworker, I guess still coworker through the University of Florida up in Gainesville. He does research on arboriculture, and I think he'll be talking about a different perspective on trees and risk, and looking at, like, instead of just what they do for us in a positive sense and more philosophical sense, this is a very applied research looking into like risk and what they can do to property and people, and maybe maybe some of the things that we worry about with trees is a little bit overblown. I think he'll hit on some of that. But anyway, that should be a pretty fun one too. Then after that, we'll have some identification stuff. And I've got the schedule filled out all the way through, I think January or February. So, but beginning in March, through February, beginning in March next year, I think we're going to start switching over to the third Wednesday. So just a heads up for that. I've got some conflicts, so I just wanted to tell you well in advance, so that we will be switching Lunch and Learn to a different Wednesday in the month. But everybody take care. It was wonderful seeing you all again in virtual Zoom land, and I'll see you all in a month. Take care.